Harry took a seat at his usual place in Umbridge's detentions. So far, he'd gotten 32 detentions, 6 verbal reprimands in class, and his head of house ordering him to keep his head down after he had responded to the last dressing down by the toad. Harry took the quill in his hand and automatically started to write the famed lines of "I must not tell lies," and of course the wound on his hand opened again. Harry did his best to ignore both Umbridge and the pain of the continuously reopening of and healing of a wound. Doesn't even sound legal, Harry thought to himself, and the more Harry thought of the legality of the quill he was using, the more he thought about his court hearing. Out of all the officials there was only one ministry official that disagreed with his hearing. Madame Bones, Susan's aunt, he reminded himself, was the head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. She had been overheard by one of the order members who worked in the ministry that the minister was in the wrong pulling the heir of a most ancient and noble house, a minor, into a courtroom for adult wizards convicted of dark crimes, and that at most the offense, if he was guilty at all, was a fine for the magical guardian. She'd not been happy. Harry remembered numerous times that Madame Bones interrupted numerous people and allowed him to speak in his own defense until Dumbledore got there. "That'll be all, Mr. Potter." Umbridge's shrilly voice penetrated his thoughts. "Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am." Harry chimed the words he repeated 32 different times. He picked up the blood-smeared parchment and the quill and brought it up to the toad's desk and sat it down where she motioned. "I do hope that this has taught you a lesson, Mr. Potter. The ministry will not stand for your lies," Umbridge says sweetly. Harry really hated her voice. Really, he just hated her, but her voice is what drove him to slam his head on his data textbook in class last. "Yes, ma'am." "I won't tell lies," Harry promised. Umbridge smiles at him before dismissing him. Harry made his way to the Gryffindor common room. He had a plan. Harry sat at the Gryffindor table in the great hall with his head on the table and his hand wrapped in the shreds of an old shirt in his lap. His hand was red and slightly infected. Harry felt nauseous. His hand hadn't closed and was still bleeding slightly, and if he was completely honest with himself, he was ready to hex the toad and be done with Hogwarts. Dumbledore refused to even look at him. His head of house just had a confrontation with the toad, where she'd been threatened to watch her next words carefully, because they might damage her future dwellings in this castle. Now Harry and the rest of the Gryffindors who overheard this were understandably mad and rather protective of their head of house, and started drowning her out by booing her and yelling rather inappropriate things. Harry had participated, and of course Umbridge saw and blamed it all of him. Professor McGonagall was going to fight his detention for a month every day, but Harry had shrugged his shoulders before telling his teacher that she was a farce of a teacher, and then his head of house had frowned at him and couldn't argue in his defense after that. Which was for the best, Harry thought. The school couldn't afford to lose her. "You all right, mate?" Ron asks worriedly, ignoring the food in front of him. Harry picked his head off the table, feeling dizzy as he did so. "I think I'm going to hex her before quitting school and go back to the Muggle world and run away from my relatives. That way, when Voldemort decides to make a public appearance, I can write the Daily Prophet with an 'I told you so,' and not be found to be looked at like supposed to save us all," Harry says before laying his head back down on the table and closing his eyes. Before either of his best friends could comment, a voice behind him says, "I think I'll ignore the threat to hex a ministry official, Mr. Potter." Harry, as well as the rest of the hall, snaps his head up to stare at the rather intimidating woman behind him. "Auntie?" Susan calls from Hufflepuff, confused. Harry stands, feeling rather impolite to having sat for so long. Amelia Bones raised an eyebrow at the young teenager in front of her. "Ma'am," Harry fumbles for something to say. "I received your letter, Mr. Potter. I'm quite interested in what you had to say," Amelia says. Harry flushes. When he'd sent the letter, he never expected for the DML he had to come to his very school. "Would you like to sit, ma'am?" Harry asks, motioning to his spot. Immediately, the line shuffled down so there was more room. Amelia hid her amusement. "Thank you, Mr. Potter, but this is going to be an official matter. I'd like to interview you in private," she states. She could see the disappointment of not being able to find out why she was there to see the famed boy who lived. "What did you do this time, Harry?" a girl with rather bushy hair hissed as she dragged the raven-haired teen back a step. She looked concerned as she flickered her gaze between the two of them. Amelia was curious if the girl would try to stun her if she said that she was here to arrest her best friend. Amelia decided she'd rather not find out the answer to her question, and merely waited for the boy to supply his protective friend an answer. Harry scratched the back of his head. "Relax, Hermione. I did what you said to do," Harry says, holding up his bloody, wrapped hand. Hermione looks shocked before nodding her head in approval. "Well, good then," she says. Harry shares a grin with Ron. "If that's settled, follow me, Mr. Potter," Amelia orders. Harry nods his head and follows her. After walking for a couple minutes, and past a few classrooms Harry knew were empty, Harry was confused as to where they were going. Madam Bones, where are we going? Harry asks hesitantly. To the infirmary. For your hand, Mr. Potter. I want it on record, she says before slowing and turning to actually look at him. And because I can tell that the damage the quill has done to your hand is quite extensive at this point. Harry glances at his hand before ignoring it. Thank you for believing me, ma'am, Harry whispers. Amelia doesn't answer. She didn't need to. Her action spoke volume for itself. Oh well. It wouldn't be long until Amelia Bones had the senior undersecretary to the minister arrested on numerous charges. Despite not being a traditional pureblood, Madam Bones played up the part of the harm caused to an heir of a most ancient and most noble house. Apparently, no matter who it was, child neglect or abuse was heavily frowned upon. Harry would never have believed it had it not been Madam Bones telling her that Lucius Malfoy voted in his favor. According to the prophet, the blonde male was heard telling off the minister whom had backed Umbridge's placement in Hogwarts. Umbridge would lose her job and spend time in an alternative Dementor-free prison. Harry couldn't have helped his laugh if he tried when Madame Bones told him under her breath that it was probably for the best, as the witch probably had no happy memories to be affected by the Dementors. Oh, Harry settled into his seat in the Dada classroom. They had a temporary professor of Auror Tonks. Harry couldn't help but grin at the strange Auror's antics. She had been welcomed by all of Hogwarts with thunderous applause, hoots, yells, and cheers. It had actually made the Auror trip on what no one knew.